The year is 793. On a small island off the coast of Northumbria, a place so remote the world has forgotten its name, a monk named Cuthbert wakes before dawn. He's done this every morning for 40 years. The same prayer, the same cold stone floor beneath his knees, the same rhythm of bells that have marked the hours since before he was born. But this morning, something is wrong. The birds have gone silent. He walks to the window of Lindisfarne Abbey, and in the gray pre-dawn light, he sees them. Ships. Long, sleek, moving through the mist like wolves circling prey. Their sails are striped red and black, their prows carved into snarling beasts. The Vikings have arrived, and what they're about to do won't just be recorded in blood and ash. It will rewrite the future of England, the church, and the entire medieval world. But here's what the history books don't tell you. The violence wasn't the worst part. What came after?
The calculated cruelty, the systematic erasure, the way they turned holy men into trophies and sacred places into theaters of humiliation. That's what broke the soul of Christian England. The real question isn't your tolerance for darkness. It's whether you're prepared to witness the turning point where humanity failed, where mercy died, and where a civilization's screams were silenced forever. If you're drawn to the documented accounts that schools won't teach, the letters monks wrote in terror, the Viking sagas that bragged about their conquests, the archaeological evidence only now being unearthed, then liking and subscribing helps us uncover more of these buried truths. Now, back to that morning, because the bells have just stopped ringing. To understand what happened at Lindisfarne, you need to understand what it was. This wasn't just a monastery. It was the beating heart of Christian England. Founded in 635 by Saint Otha,
Aden, Lindisfarne, was where the faith took root in the north, where kings came to pray, where monks illuminated manuscripts so beautiful they seemed touched by God himself. The Lindisfarne Gospels, still preserved today, were created here. Pages of gold leaf and lapis lazuli, prayers written in Latin and Old English, art that took a lifetime to master. Each letter formed with a precision that bordered on worship, each page a conversation with eternity. This was a place of peace. The monks had no weapons, they had no walls. The island itself was their protection, cut off from the mainland twice a day by the tide. They believed God would protect them, and for 158 years he did. Brother Cuthbert, the one standing at the window watching those ships, had never seen violence. None of them had. The youngest monks, boys sent here at 12 or 13, knew only the rhythm of prayer bells, matins at midnight, lords at dawn, prime, terce, sex, none, vespers, compline.
The hours that divided their days into portions of devotion. They woke in darkness. They copied scripture by candlelight. They ate in silence. They slept on stone. And they believed, truly believed, that this life of suffering and discipline made them untouchable, that holiness was armor. But on June 8, 793, the Viking longships berthed on Holy Island, and the men who stepped off weren't soldiers. They were raiders, opportunists, farmers and fishermen who spent winters killing each other over frozen dirt and summers looking for easier prey. They had heard stories whispered in Norse trade ports, carried by merchants who'd seen the coast of England, stories of a place where silver sat unguarded, where men knelt in prayer instead of standing with swords, where weakness was mistaken for holiness. To the Vikings, Lindisfarne wasn't sacred, it was a treasure chest with a cross on top, and the monks inside, They were obstacles or toys. It didn't matter which.
Brother Cuthbert watches the ship's beach. He counts them. 8, maybe 9. The mist makes it hard to tell. He sees men jumping into the shallow water, axes in hand, moving fast. He should run, warn the others. But his legs won't move, because somewhere deep in his mind, a thought is forming, a terrible, heretical thought that he'll carry to his grave. God isn't going to stop this.
Đẩy sang soạn vạc.
Một ngôn ngữ giọng giống như gạch và đá, như thứ gì đó bị đào lên từ đáy biển. Brother Cuthbert finally moves. He runs through the stone corridors, his sandals slapping against the floor. He's shouting now, waking the others. 70 men live here. Most are old. Some are boys barely 14, sent by noble families to learn the scriptures. They gather in the chapel. The abbot, a man named Higbald, tells them to pray, to
History, but Norse sagas describe men like him. Walks up to Higbald. He's calm, almost curious. He looks at the silver chalice on the altar, the gold reliquary holding the bones of Saint Cuthbert, the jeweled cross that is hung above this place for generations. And he takes them, not violently, not with rage, just takes them the way you'd pick an apple from a tree. When Higbald protests, when the old man reaches out to stop him, the Viking strikes him across the face with the flat of his axe. Higbald falls, blood on the altar, blood on the stone floor, blood on the white robes of the monks who rush forward to help him. The monks freeze, and then the violence begins. The younger brother and walks away, because killing Cuthbert right now would be mercy, and the Vikings aren't here for mercy. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by monks who survived other raids, describes Lindisfarne like this: "In this year, terrible portents appeared over Northumbria and miserably frightened the inhabitants. These were exceptional flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. A great famine soon followed these signs, and a little after that, in the same year, on the 8th of June, the harrying of the heathen miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne by raping and slaughter. Raping and slaughter."
The letter written by Alcuin of York, a scholar serving Charlemagne's court, is more specific. He writes to the Bishop of Lindisfarne, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The church of St. Cuthbert is scattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. A place more venerable than all in Britain is given as prey to pagan peoples, spattered with blood. The monks who don't run are stripped not just of their robes, of their dignity. Vikings pull them outside and force them to watch as the abbey is ransacked. Manuscripts thrown into the mud, pages that took months to illuminate, ruined in seconds. Chalices melted down for raw silver, relics, bones of saints that pilgrims had traveled miles to venerate, scattered like garbage. One Viking finds the library, shelves of books. He doesn't know what they are, can't read, doesn't care. He
Sweeps arm across the shelf and watches them fall. Hundreds of hours of work, generations of knowledge gone. Another finds the wine cellar, the communion wine. He drinks straight from the barrel, then smashes it. Red wine floods the floor, mixing with the blood already there. Some monks are drowned in the shallow tidal waters that surround Lindisfarne, held under until their prayers become bubbles. Others are taken as slaves, chained together, marched to the ships, young ones mostly, the ones who can still work. And some, this is the part that archaeology confirms, are displayed. Bodies left propped against the church walls, positioned kneeling as if in prayer. A mockery, a message. The Vikings take the golden cross from above the altar, and one of them hangs it around his neck. He walks outside, stands in front of the remaining monks, and spreads his arms wide, mimicking Christ on the cross. The other Vikings roar with laughter.
They not just stealing, they're performing. Brother Cuthbert watches this. He's still alive, still on his knees, but something inside him has broken. Not his body, his belief. That the world could allow this, that God could watch this, that men could do this to other men and feel nothing, worse than nothing, joy. The raid lasts 4 hours. By midday, it's over. The Vikings load their ships with silver, gold, anything they can carry. They take 12 monks as slaves. They leave 37 bodies. And when they finally push off from the shore, when their ships disappear back into the mist, Lindisfarne is silent. No bells, no prayers, just smoke and the sound of the tide pulling bodies out to sea. But here's the part that makes this worse, the part that turns a tragedy into a nightmare. The Vikings came back, not once, not twice. For the next 70 years, Lindisfarne and monasteries like it, Jarrow, Monk Wearmouth, Iona, were hit again and again, because the Vikings realized something.
Monasteries don't fight back, and more importantly, monks can be ransomed. No light, no air, just the sound of oars and the smell of salt and vomit. They crossed the North Sea in darkness. 3 days, maybe 4, he lost count. When they reached Norway, he was sold to a farmer, a man who needed hands for the harvest. Cuthbert, who had spent his entire life copying scriptures, was now pulling weeds from frozen ground. His fingers, once used to hold quills, cracked and bled in the cold. He tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. Forced to row Viking ships, work Scandinavian farms. Some converted, some died, some simply disappeared. Brother Cuthbert died 3 years after his capture, far from home, buried in a field with no marker, no name, just another forgotten captive in a land that didn't know what monks were and didn't care. But here's where the story gets darker. In 2017, archaeologists, excavating a mass grave in Dorset, England, found the remains of 54 men, all decapitated, all young, all buried in the late 8th or early 9th century.
Isotope analysis of their teeth revealed they weren't local. They were Scandinavian. At first, researchers thought Viking, victims of English retaliation. Finally, evidence of resistance of England fighting back. But then they found something else. One skeleton was buried with a small wooden cross, crude, carved by hand. Another had marks on the spine, consistent with a life spent bent over copying manuscripts. The kind of curvature you only get from decades of hunching over a desk. These weren't Viking raiders. These were Viking-held monks. Men who had been captured, enslaved, brought to Scandinavia, and then brought back to England. Maybe as translators, maybe as hostages for another ransom, maybe just because the Vikings were moving and the monks came with the cargo. And when they were no longer useful, when the ransom wasn't paid or the work was done, they were executed, all 54 of them, lined up, beheaded, thrown into a pit.
The archaeological report notes something else. The cuts on the neck bones were clean, professional, done by someone who knew how to kill efficiently. This wasn't rage, this wasn't battle, this was business. You've just learned something that isn't in most textbooks, that the Viking raids weren't just violence, they were industry, that monasteries became hunting grounds, that monks became commodities, trade goods, assets on a ledger. If that doesn't make you want to remember their names, if the fact that some of them died in foreign lands, far from home, praying in a language their captives mocked, doesn't move you to subscribe and keep these stories alive, then maybe we've forgotten what history is supposed to teach us. That cruelty doesn't need hatred, it just needs opportunity. And that the most terrifying violence isn't the kind driven by passion, it's the kind driven by profit. After Lindisfarne, everything changed.
Monasteries that survived built walls, high ones, stone ones, the kind that said, "We're done trusting God to do the work we should have done ourselves." They hired guards, men with swords who stood watch while monks prayed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Places dedicated to peace, now defended by violence. They moved their treasures inland. The famous Book of Kells, one of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts in history, was created in Scotland, but moved to Ireland specifically to escape Viking raids. Monks carried it by hand, traveling at night, hiding it in caves when they heard rumors of longships. The monks stopped being just monks. They became fortress builders, diplomats, spies. They learned Norse, studied Viking tactics, started keeping networks of informants along the coast who'd light signal fires when raiders appeared. Prayer was no longer enough. You had to be useful, strategic, armed. And England? England militarized.
King Alfred the Great, who ruled a century after Lindisfarne, created a network of fortified towns called burhs, 33 of them, positioned so that no one in his kingdom was more than 20 miles from safety. He built a navy,
reorganized the army, instituted a draft, taxed his people to pay for walls and weapons, all because of what happened on June 8th, 793. By the time the Vikings were finally driven back by the 11th century, England wasn't the same. It was harder, meaner, more suspicious of outsiders. Churches had armed guards. Monasteries looked like castles. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. The age of undefended holiness was over. Lindisfarne Abbey was eventually rebuilt, but the monks who returned walked through halls that still smelled of smoke. They prayed in a chapel where bloodstains had seeped into the stone, and every time the wind blew in from the sea, they listened for the sound of ships. Some refused to go back. The trauma was too deep.
One monk writing in 820 said he could no longer sleep near windows, that the sight of the ocean made him vomit, that he heard the screams of his brothers in his dreams and woke up praying in a language he didn't remember learning. But here's the strangest part. The Vikings eventually converted. By the 10th century, Scandinavian kings were being baptized. Canute the Great, a Viking who conquered England, became one of its most Christian rulers. Viking settlements in England adopted the faith, built churches, funded monasteries. The raiders became rulers. The destroyers of churches became their patrons. Some of the men who burned Lindisfarne had grandsons who prayed there. But the trauma remained. A 12th century monk named Simeon of Durham wrote, "The sorrow of that day lives still in the hearts of those who remember. For the heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar, trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God.
Like dung in the streets, like dung in the streets." That's how survivors remembered it. Not as a battle, as a desecration, as the moment the world revealed itself to be crueler than they'd been taught. When faith proved not to be armor, when holiness proved not to be protection, when they learned that the only thing more dangerous than evil is assuming evil won't come for you. So why does Lindisfarne matter today? Because it's a reminder that civilization is not a given, that the things we consider untouchable, schools, libraries, places of worship, can be destroyed in a morning by people who see them differently. The monks of Lindisfarne believed their holiness would protect them, that their books, their prayers, their peaceful way of life was immune to the chaos outside their walls. They were wrong. And the lesson isn't that faith is useless. It's that faith without preparedness is vulnerability.
Brother Cuthbert, before he was taken, before he died in that Norwegian field, wrote one letter that survived. It was found in the 19th century, preserved in a monastery in York. He wrote it 3 months after the first raid, addressed to no one in particular. He said, "I do not know if God has abandoned us, or if we have abandoned Him. I do not know if our prayers were too weak, or if the world is simply stronger than we believed. I know only that I watched men laugh while they killed, and that laughter, more than the blood, more than the screams, is what I cannot forget. That men could find joy in our suffering means the world is not what we were taught, and I do not know how to live in a world like that." 3 years later, he was in chains. Alcuin of York, the scholar who wrote to the Bishop of Lindisfarne, said this, "Consider carefully, brothers. and examine diligently, lest perchance this unaccustomed and unheard of evil was
merited by some unheard of evil practice. He was trying to make sense of the senseless, trying to find meaning in massacre, trying to believe that suffering has a reason. But maybe the meaning is simpler. The world doesn't care what you hold sacred. It only cares what you can defend. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths, a moment when peace was mistaken for weakness, and weakness became an invitation for violence. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily the light can be snuffed out by those who refuse to see it, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and keep the past alive, because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced centuries ago. Especially then, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, but only because someone chose to.